Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Book review. So, I know, I should have read this book years ago. Probably most of you have already read it and don't need me to tell you about it, but I'm a bit behind the times. I'm just reading it now. So if you haven't read it, this book is often mentioned in the same breath as Slaughterhouse-Five. Slaughterhouse-Five being another book I've recently read. Excuse me. And on the surface, both books have a lot of similarities. Both books were written by authors who fought in World War II. Both authors found themselves unable to write about their war experience in the traditional narrative, and so they turned to comedy instead. Both books were published in the 1960s when the nation was focused on a different war. And both books take a non-linear perspective. They jump around in time. But that's where the similarities end. Slaughterhouse-Five has very kind of dry humor. But Catch-22 is just bouncing off the walls with silliness. One of my first thoughts when reading this book was, wow, this is pretty avant-garde stuff. I can't believe this was written way back in 1961. Second thought was, actually, wait a minute. Yes, I can. I can totally believe this book was written way back in the 1960s. The book feels very tied to the humor of the time if you think about it. Think of the Marx Brothers and all their comedy sketches. Or think of the old vaudeville sketches like Abbott and Costello or Who's on First. And think of all of that in like a book form, as somebody had taken kind of all those Marx Brothers and Abbott and Costello sketches and written them into a book. Like Abbott and Costello, Who's on First, a lot of the book revolves around one character having a very illogical view of the world and another character just refusing to understand what's going on, and then the dialogue just kind of going back and forth from there. But in terms of which character is wacky and which character is the straight man, there's not a lot of consistency between chapters. So one character might play the straight man in one scene, but then he'd be the silly man in the next scene. It all seems to be based on what serves the plot best. Of course, I say plot. I'm using the word plot loosely, because much of the book isn't so much based on a plot as it is just a running series of gags. At first, I got tired of this book very quickly when I tried to read it for long stretches. I mean, I like the Marx Brothers. I'm a classic movies buff. I like Duck Soup. I like a lot of their old stuff. But about an hour is my kind of limit for that kind of movie. This, Catch-22, is a 561-page book, and that feels like a little bit of overkill for that kind of silly humor. The book is anything for a laugh. So every line is a joke, or it's a setup for a joke, and then the joke is in the next line. I know I was just comparing it to the Marx Brothers, but it's also a little bit like those airplane movies. You remember those ones? There's so many gags flying around so fast that it doesn't even matter if half of them are duds. With this many jokes, at least some of them are bound to be funny, even if the majority are groaners. And it works, you know. There's usually something pretty funny on each page. There's a lot of bad jokes on each page as well, but you know, there's at least something pretty funny on each page. But because of the book's fractured nature, because it's so much kind of joking and then setting up for the next scene with more joking, I found it hard to absorb myself in it. You know, the way you absorb yourself in a good novel and just read it for hours. I couldn't do that with this book. I had to take it in small doses. Now, the beginning of the book is just a series of sketches, but if you stick with the book long enough, a plot does start to emerge. And especially near the end of the book, there are some serious themes of anti-militarism that start to emerge. I say serious. I mean serious as in nothing about the book is serious, but like serious as in what do I want to say? Effective. The book reminds me. Sorry, I know I'm comparing it to a lot of different movies, but to throw in one more comparison, it reminds me a bit of that John Lennon film, How I Won the War. I actually, being a huge Beatles buff, I actually did sit through How I Won the War at one point. It seems to have a very similar type of humor style to Catch-22. I also remember reading at one point a review of How I Won the War, which I read somewhere along the line when I was a big Beatles fan. This review of How I Won the War said, the point of this film is that war is ridiculous and that it's conducted by idiots. But that isn't a very strong anti-war message. Would war be any better if it was conducted by people who knew what they were doing? End quote. So that was a criticism of How I Won the War. And I think that same criticism maybe could be applied to Catch-22, or at least that question. But that being said, the strength of the book is that it draws you in, so that near the end of the book, after you've kind of waded through all these pages of just bizarre Marx Brothers comedy, you're actually beginning to see everything through the lens of Yossarian, who's the main character. So you do start to realize that it's just ridiculous that the soldiers have to throw away their lives just because on the command of their superior officer. Or that people should be killed just because they happen to live in a certain city. Like all great satires, the book makes you realize that it's real life that is actually bizarre.